when photography specialist Margaret Hensley studied the enhanced Parker family portrait in 1976, she spotted something that froze her in place. The little boy in front, 6-year-old Benjamin Parker, had pupils that didn't reflect the camera or the farmhouse, but instead row after row of decaying gravestones. Just 2 weeks after that picture was taken in 1904, Benjamin died suddenly and was buried in the very cemetery his eyes seemed to predict. But the true shock came when the enhancement revealed something far stranger, something that challenged what we thought we knew about camera's mortality and the supernatural. The autumn of 1904 had dressed Ohio in fiery golds and deep reds, and the Parker farm stretched proudly across 200 acres of fertile ground worked by 3 generations. Jeremiah Parker, its patriarch, had carved success out of wilderness with nothing but grit and calloused hands. His stern gray eyes told the story of decades of labor seasons, of feast and famine, and a will that never wavered. That October, the Parkers gathered for what seemed like an ordinary harvest celebration, a family portrait to mark the passing years. Jeremiah's wife, Martha, insisted they bring in a professional from Columbus, believing photographs were more than images, they were keepsakes of fleeting time. The man who answered the call, Theodore Whitman, arrived with his heavy tripod glass plates and a reputation for capturing not just appearances, but the very spirit of his subjects. The Parker homestead, built by Jeremiah with timber from his own land, stood tall behind them, with its wraparound porch and hand-carved details Martha had demanded. Roses curled dormant along its beams as morning light stretched across the porch. 23 Parkers assembled, from Jeremiah's sharp-minded 87-year-old mother, Sarah, down to young Benjamin Roberts' mischievous little boy with sandy hair and bright blue eyes that always danced with mischief. As Theodore carefully arranged the family for the shot, his attention kept drifting back to Benjamin, whose behavior seemed strangely out of step with the cheerful scene about to be frozen in time. While the other children squirmed and fussed about standing still, Benjamin didn't move a muscle. He stared straight into the camera with a focus far too intense for a 6-year-old, his gaze so piercing that Theodore, the photographer, found himself unsettled. For nearly half an hour, Theodore adjusted the group, lining up the Parkers in perfect symmetry, Jeremiah and Martha in the center, their children and spouses surrounding them, teenage grandchildren forming the middle row, and the youngest, including Benjamin, arranged neatly in front. When the camera was finally ready, Theodore slipped beneath the dark cloth to expose the glass plate. In that instant, the world seemed to hush. The rustling leaves outside stilled the autumn air. Itself felt suspended, and Theodore later admitted he felt as though he was standing on the threshold of something vast and unknowable. The exposure lasted only seconds, but the family held themselves as though carved from stone. Benjamin especially seemed locked in a trance, his eyes wide and unblinking. Only when the lens cap was replaced did he blink, as though waking from somewhere far away. Afterward, Theodore photographed smaller family groupings and individual portraits, but Benjamin remained eerily subdued throughout the 2-hour session. His mother, Elizabeth, quietly remarked to Martha that she had never seen her usually restless son so serious. Theodore carefully packed his glass plates and returned to Columbus. Something about that day clung to him, and he devoted extra care to developing the Parker portraits. The results were extraordinary. The family photograph captured not just faces, but a sense of depth, of unseen threads binding them together. When the finished portraits were delivered 2 weeks later, the Parkers gathered at the dining room table to examine them. Mounted on heavy cardboard and tucked into an elegant folder from New York, the large portrait was breathtaking in both clarity and composition. Yet, as they admired it, grief overshadowed their pride. Just days after the session, Benjamin had fallen ill with what seemed a harmless fever. Within a week, he was gone. Benjamin's illness came on fast and merciless. Though the family doctor tried everything he could and even summoned a specialist from Columbus, the boy slipped away within a week. No one could explain it. He had been strong and healthy on the day of the portrait, showing no hint of sickness. His sudden death left the family shaken, and he was buried on the hill behind the farmhouse in the cemetery Jeremiah's grandfather had established. 3 generations of Parkers rested there, along with farm hands and neighbors who had long since become part of the family's history. In the months that followed, grief weighed so heavily on the Parkers that Martha tucked the family portrait away in her cedar chest. It was too painful to look at, too sharp a reminder of the last day they had all stood together. For decades, the photograph remained hidden, brought out only on rare occasions when visiting relatives asked to see it. Over time, the farm changed hands, children moved away, and the original farmhouse was eventually sold. Many possessions were scattered among relatives or donated, and the Parker portrait, along with other family documents, ended up at the Ohio Historical Society. There it sat, quietly in the archives until 1976, when historian and photography expert Margaret Hensley uncovered it while researching rural Ohio families. Struck by the clarity of the image and the haunting story tied to it, she decided to examine it more closely with newly available enhancement technology. Margaret wasn't just interested in the family's tragedy. She wanted to better understand the technical methods photographers like Theodore Whitman had used at the turn of the century. One evening, working alone in her lab, she slid the portrait under a high-powered magnifier. She carefully studied the fine stitching in their clothes, the carved details of the farmhouse, the crisp October lighting, all hallmarks of Whitman's skill. But when she turned her attention to young Benjamin's eyes, something froze her in place. His gaze, even in the unenhanced photo, had always seemed strangely magnetic, almost alive. Now magnified many times over his pupils, revealed something no one had ever noticed before. What stared back at Margaret wasn't the faint outline of a photographer or the farmhouse porch. Inside Benjamin's eyes was the reflection of a cemetery. Rows of weathered headstones, tall monuments, and winding paths. Not a vague blur, but a chillingly detailed image, as though the boy's eyes had been windows into the very graveyard where weeks later he would be laid to rest. Margaret pulled back from the equipment, shaken, realizing she had uncovered something far stranger than just a family portrait. The reflection inside Benjamin's eyes was disturbingly clear. Rows of granite and marble headstones stood under the shade of sprawling oaks, their inscriptions sharp enough to read. Winding dirt paths cut between the graves, and in the very foreground, Margaret could make out what looked like a small, freshly dug plot, the size and placement exactly where a child's grave might be. At first she tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was a quirk of old photographic glass, a distortion of light, or some flaw in the developing process. Historians often encountered strange reflections in early photographs. But the more Margaret studied the image, the less she could dismiss it. This wasn't an accident of chemistry or chance. The cemetery reflected in Benjamin's pupils showed too much precision, individual inscriptions, distinct carvings, even shadows consistent with the angle of the sun. It had the depth and detail of a scene truly witnessed, not a photographic glitch. Determined to understand, Margaret immersed herself in the Parker family records. She traced Benjamin's death, his burial, and the layout of the family cemetery on the hill behind the farmhouse. When she compared her archival findings to what she saw in the boy's eyes, the realization nearly stopped her breath. The reflection matched the Parker graveyard, exactly its trees, its monuments, its rows of stones. And that fresh grave historical records confirmed that Benjamin had been buried in that precise spot, a place that would have been nothing but empty ground on the morning the photograph was taken. The boy's pupils had not captured the world as it was, but as it would be. When Margaret published her findings along with magnified images and technical analysis in a respected photography journal, the article ignited a storm. Some scholars claimed it had to be a double exposure, perhaps the result of Theodore Whitman accidentally photographing a cemetery and imprinting it onto the glass plate. But that theory quickly unraveled. Whitman was known for his exacting precision, and a double exposure should have appeared across the whole photograph, not only in Benjamin's eyes. Research into Whitman's body of work revealed no cemetery images from that time at all. Others in the paranormal community saw it differently. They pointed to Benjamin's unsettling stillness during the portrait session, his trance-like gaze, and the sudden mysterious illness that claimed him days later. To them, the reflection was not a photographic mistake, but evidence of something far stranger, an uncanny glimpse of a child, staring into his own fate with the camera capturing what only he could see. Skeptics were quick to dismiss the claims, chalking everything up to human imagination and pattern seeking. They argued that Margaret and her colleagues were reading too much into vague shapes and shadows, convincing themselves they saw headstones simply because they expected to. To settle the debate, Margaret invited other experts to weigh in. Among them was Dr. Robert Chen of the University of Chicago, who brought state-of-the-art equipment to the Ohio Historical Society for an independent study. His analysis confirmed every detail Margaret had observed and uncovered something even more unsettling. Through Chen's higher resolution enhancement, the cemetery reflection grew sharper, revealing shadowy figures drifting among the headstones. Most were indistinct, little more than silhouettes on the periphery, but one figure stood out. In Benjamin's left eye, a childlike form appeared beside the fresh grave. It was hazy, almost easy to dismiss as artifact, yet its size and posture resembled a boy no older than Benjamin himself. When other photography experts around the country repeated the examination, they reported the same findings: the cemetery, the disturbed earth of a new grave, and the spectral figures wandering among the stones. With so many independent confirmations, the idea of simple misinterpretation became harder to defend. As word spread, the Parker family portrait became a sensation. It was written about in journals, debated at conferences, and featured in documentaries that explored the eerie overlap of photography and the paranormal. Museums requested to view the original plate, while copies of the enhanced images circulated widely. The attention eventually reached surviving members of the Parker family, including Benjamin's great-niece Dorothy Whitfield. She added chilling context. According to family lore, Benjamin had been plagued by strange dreams before his death. He told his mother of nightmares, where he stood in the family cemetery surrounded by unfamiliar relatives, staring at his own gravestone. Even more disturbing, the inscription he described matched the one eventually carved into his actual headstone. At the time, these stories were dismissed as a child's imagination, but paired with the photographic revelations, they gained a far darker significance. Dorothy also revealed that in the years following Benjamin's death, relatives reported odd occurrences around the cemetery. Some swore they saw a little boy playing near Benjamin's grave. Others claimed to hear faint laughter or weeping echoing among the headstones late at night. Margaret pressed on with her research, interviewing locals, cross-referencing historical records, and analyzing other photographs by Theodore Whitman. Her years of investigation culminated in a best-selling book that established her as a leading authority on paranormal photography. Yet perhaps the most haunting discovery came from Whitman himself. In his personal journals, found decades later in his daughter's attic, he described what he called visionary sessions. During certain shoots, he wrote, the camera seemed to capture more than appearances. Faces hinted at futures not yet lived. Landscapes revealed places no one remembered existing, and portraits carried a weight he could not explain. His entry about the Parker family portrait was especially telling. He confessed to feeling as though the boy had been staring not into his camera, but through it into a space far beyond their world. Theodore's journal revealed just how deeply the moment had unsettled him. He admitted that while the Parkers laughed and smiled, He was overcome with a heaviness he couldn't explain, as though he were capturing not just a happy gathering, but a sorrow that hadn't yet unfolded. Most chilling of all, he included a rough sketch of what he swore he saw reflected in Benjamin's eyes, a graveyard scene that matched almost exactly what Margaret's enhancements would reveal more than 70 years later. This connection suggested the reflection wasn't some modern illusion born of technology, but something Theodore himself had glimpsed at the very moment the shutter clicked. The photograph remained a subject of fascination and debate well into the late 20th century. With every leap in imaging technology, new layers seemed to emerge. In the 1990s, computer analysis detected subtle differences between Benjamin's left and right pupils, almost as if they were showing slightly different angles of the same cemetery, consistent with real human vision rather than a photographic flaw. When researchers applied digital colorization, the reflected graveyard appeared bathed in the golden tones of sunrise or sunset, an impossibility since the Parker portrait had been taken mid-morning in bright daylight. The most disturbing revelation came from pattern recognition software that examined the headstones visible in Benjamin's pupils. Several inscriptions matched the names and death dates of Parker family members who were still alive in 1904, but died years or even decades later. In other words, Benjamin's eyes had not only shown his own grave, but seemed to capture the cemetery as it would look long into the future. These discoveries forced researchers to confront uncomfortable questions. Had the boy himself somehow glimpsed his death and those of his family? Or had Theodore's camera, in some inexplicable way, opened a window onto events that had not yet occurred? Some theorists pointed to quantum mechanics, speculating that the photographic process might have momentarily entangled with another time, imprinting the future onto the glass plate. Others suggested Benjamin possessed a rare psychic sensitivity, his visions and dreams serving as evidence that his perception extended beyond the present, and the camera merely recorded what he saw. Despite decades of study, no explanation has resolved the mystery. The Parker family portrait remains preserved in the Ohio Historical Society archives, occasionally displayed to curious crowds and scholars alike. The enhanced images of Benjamin's pupils circulate in books, documentaries, and online forums, often cited as one of the most compelling cases of paranormal photography ever recorded. For those who know the story, the photograph carries a haunting duality, a beautiful snapshot of family pride and togetherness, and at the same time, a chilling foreshadowing of tragedy that no one present that October morning could have imagined. Benjamin Parker stands at the front of his family, a small, solemn figure, whose gaze seems to pierce straight through time, his bright eyes locked on the lens with unnerving focus. Would not reveal their secret until decades later, when modern technology uncovered the impossible reflections of gravestones, shadowed paths winding through a cemetery, and a freshly dug plot waiting for the very child who would be buried there before his family ever received the photograph. What was captured that October morning in 1904 challenges the boundaries of our understanding. Was it simply a trick of light or something that revealed the fragile line between present and future? Each new attempt to enhance the Parker portrait only deepened the mystery, uncovering details hidden within Benjamin's pupils, as though the image held infinite layers, each one a whisper of something stranger than the last. The photograph has become more than a relic. It is a reminder that reality may not be as fixed and predictable as we believe, and that in the stillness of a single shutter, click time itself may have bled through. In 2003, the investigation took an unexpected turn when Dr. Helena Vasquez, a neuroscientist at Stanford, brought a fresh perspective. Unlike earlier researchers who focused solely on the photograph, she studied Benjamin himself, his family's history, their medical records, and their peculiar legacy. Her findings revealed a striking pattern. Across generations, Parker men had been marked by unusual neurological traits and abilities that defied simple explanation. Benjamin's great-great-grandfather, Josiah Parker, was remembered as a weather prophet, accurately predicting storms days before they struck. Farmers trusted him over official forecasts, and his warnings saved lives and property. His grandson Benjamin's grandfather was said to have foreseen battle strategies during the Civil War. Letters preserved in the Ohio Historical Society describe how he warned comrades of ambushes and enemy movements, predictions that proved so accurate, his regiment began to rely on his visions. The gift or curse did not end there. Benjamin's own brother Marcus, who died young, often spoke of seeing people no one else could. He described long-dead relatives in vivid detail, recalling stories and mannerisms he could never have known. These eerie patterns pointed to something inherited, and Dr. Vasquez found the scientific link. Several living descendants of the Parker family had been diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy, a condition that disrupts electrical activity in the brain's temporal lobe, an area tied to memory perception and emotion. In some cases, this abnormal activity has been associated with mystical visions, déjà vu, and even experiences that feel like glimpses of other times. Dr. Vasquez hypothesized that Benjamin may have carried this same neurological trait, a genetic predisposition that heightened his perception beyond ordinary human senses. Perhaps his unusual stillness that day, his trance-like focus on the lens, and even his haunting reflections were not accidents of photography, but a manifestation of a mind wired to see beyond the present. Whether the Parker family carried a gift of prophecy or a quirk of the brain that opened windows into other realities, the result was the same: a child's eyes, forever holding an image of his own grave preserved in glass for more than a century. Theodore may have felt unease that October morning, but what Benjamin's eyes seemed to reveal was something far beyond foreboding. It hinted at a collapse of time itself. Decades later, Dr. Helena Vasquez proposed that Benjamin's unusual focus during the portrait might have pushed his brain into an altered state, where consciousness briefly accessed multiple timelines at once. Her work aligned with emerging theories in quantum consciousness, the idea that awareness might not be bound to linear time, but could exist in quantum superposition, glimpsing several possible realities until observation fixed one into place. To test her hypothesis, Vasquez employed a cutting-edge forensic technique that reconstructed neural activity from eye reflections in historical photographs. When applied to the Parker portrait, the results were staggering. Benjamin's brain patterns showed temporal lobe seizure activity, but layered on top of that were neural signals no one had ever documented before. His visual cortex appeared to be processing overlapping images as if his eyes were receiving inputs from more than one timeline. Even more astonishing, his brain was firing at frequencies beyond the limits of ordinary human perception patterns, suggesting that he was perceiving events outside the flow of linear time. The scientific and media worlds erupted. Vasquez's findings were hailed as groundbreaking by some and ridiculed as pseudoscience by others. But her work gained momentum when she identified living descendants of the Parker family with similar neurological traits. Under controlled conditions, subjects were shown random photographs while their brain activity was recorded. The results were inconsistent, but at times extraordinary. One participant, Rachel Morrison, a descendant of Benjamin's cousin, demonstrated startling abilities. When shown a 1923 family portrait, she became distressed, describing visions of a fire and people trapped inside a house. Records later confirmed the home pictured in the photograph had burned down 6 months after it was taken, killing 3 family members. Her accuracy was strongest when looking at images that clearly showed human eyes, leading Vasquez to theorize that the eyes functioned like quantum antennas, able to transmit or receive information across time. Collaboration soon expanded to major physics departments. At MIT, Dr. Michael Chen advanced the idea that photographic emulsions could capture quantum information in superpositions storing potential futures that only later technologies could decode. Experiments with custom plates exposed to quantum fields suggested that photographs might indeed trap fragments of reality that exist outside of time's arrow. Meanwhile, new high-resolution scans of Benjamin's eyes continued to yield baffling results. Researchers identified architectural details of cemetery monuments that were not built until years after his death. Even more chilling, Benjamin's left pupil seemed to reflect the graveyard in winter, while his right eye showed it in summer, as though he had been perceiving multiple seasons, multiple versions of the same place at once. What began as a family tragedy had become a nexus for science, philosophy, and the paranormal. Was Benjamin Parker a child cursed with visions of his own death? Or was his gaze evidence that consciousness itself can slip the boundaries of time? Each discovery only deepened the riddle, suggesting that the Parker family portrait was more than a picture. It was a frozen portal, a fragment of reality, where the past, present, and future converged. The deeper researchers dug into Benjamin Parker's eyes, the stranger the discoveries became. Computer analysis of the shadowy figures among the gravestones revealed that they weren't uniform, but dressed in clothing from different eras, almost as if generations of the dead had gathered together in one place. Some faces bore uncanny resemblance to members of the Parker family, even to individuals still alive at the time the photograph was taken. The most unsettling of all was the small, childlike figure near the fresh grave. Facial recognition software suggested it was Benjamin himself, slightly older, spectral, and staring directly outward from the reflection-locking eyes with viewers across more than a century. As high-resolution copies spread online, the Parker portrait became a digital obsession. Thousands of amateur investigators pored over the enhanced images, some claiming to find secret codes hidden in light and shadow, others swearing they could see dates and numbers carved into the reflections. Most of these were dismissed as pareidolia, the human tendency to find meaning where none exists. Yet a few findings stood out. A retired math teacher discovered that the arrangement of headstones mirrored specific astronomical configurations that aligned with the date of Benjamin's death. This sparked serious academic inquiry, and researchers soon uncovered further correlations between the cemetery's layout and celestial events throughout Benjamin's short life. Astrophysicist Dr. Sarah Kellerman built on this, noting that the Parker portrait had been taken during a rare planetary alignment combined with unusually high solar activity. Such conditions created geomagnetic disturbances that might, she proposed, have briefly thinned the veil between timelines. Sensitive individuals like Benjamin could have been more receptive during such moments, perceiving alternate futures imprinted into the photographic process. Supporting her theory, local newspapers from October 1904 documented a rash of paranormal reports, ghost sightings, prophetic dreams, and unexplained photographic anomalies, all clustered around the same weeks as the Parker portrait. The mystery deepened further with the discovery of Theodore Wittmann's personal journal. Already a respected photographer, Wittmann had quietly immersed himself in the era's spiritualist movement, believing cameras could capture more than appearances, that they could reveal souls, energies, and unseen dimensions. He described rituals he used during portrait sessions, including special chemical preparations and deliberate posing, designed to open spiritual pathways. His account of the Parker session was particularly revealing. Theodore wrote that the air around the family felt charged, crowded with invisible presences. He noticed Benjamin glancing toward empty spaces, nodding as if responding to unheard voices. At first he dismissed it as a child's imagination, but the boy's steady trance-like engagement convinced him something more profound was happening. Then Whitman himself experienced fleeting visions, glimpses of the Parker Cemetery, and of a small grave being prepared for the very boy standing before him. The sensation was so strong that he nearly ended the session, but some inner compulsion urged him to continue. The journal's revelations reframed the photograph entirely. They suggested the strange images in Benjamin's eyes were not just artifacts or products of later interpretation, but phenomena witnessed in real time by both the subject and the photographer. When researchers revisited Whitman's broader body of work, they found several portraits with peculiar anomalies, reflections of places unrelated to the setting or faces that seemed to subtly change when viewed from different angles. Together, these discoveries painted a picture not just of a single haunted photograph, but of a photographer who may have repeatedly brushed against the boundary between the visible world and something far stranger. Theodore Whitman's body of work suggested that the Parker portrait was not an isolated anomaly, but part of a pattern that followed him throughout his career. In one haunting example, a wedding portrait taken just months before the Parker session revealed strange details. Under enhancement, the bride's bouquet, vibrant and fresh in memory, appeared wilted and decayed in the photograph. Within a year, the couple's marriage collapsed in bitterness, and the bride perished in a tragic carriage accident. Another photograph of a wealthy businessman seemed perfectly ordinary until enhanced analysis revealed a shadow, pointing in an impossible direction toward the very location where the man's business empire would later collapse. These findings suggested that Theodore himself may have possessed an intuitive, perhaps supernatural sensitivity that infused his photography with prophetic imagery. When paired with subjects like Benjamin, whose family history pointed to unusual gifts, these effects may have been magnified, producing images that transcended mere documentation. As the Parker portrait grew in notoriety, religious and spiritual communities claimed it as proof of deeper truths. To some, Benjamin's eyes reflected not just a cemetery, but eternity itself, a confirmation of life beyond death and divine providence. Churches began weaving his story into sermons about fate, the soul, and God's unseen plan. Benjamin became a symbol of innocence, chosen to bear witness to realities beyond human comprehension. But such interpretations raised troubling questions. If the boy had seen his own death, why had he remained silent? Did that silence mean he had no free will to alter his fate? Was he bound by destiny, or did divine design demand that his visions remain unspoken, so the truth could emerge decades later? Some theologians argued Benjamin's experience represented predestination, his life and death orchestrated as a test of faith for future generations. Others took a different view, suggesting reincarnation or soul migration might explain his uncanny knowledge of family history and deceased relatives. Perhaps Benjamin's visions were not of the future alone, but echoes from lives before or yet to come. Such theories resonated with family accounts of the boy speaking of ancestors he had never met, describing them in uncanny detail. The debate spilled into academia, where scholars wrestled with how to reconcile the photograph with modern thought. Universities began offering courses examining the Parker case as a rare intersection of science, spirituality, and cultural belief. Harvard professor James Harrison became one of the foremost voices situating Benjamin's story within a long tradition of child mystics, young individuals across cultures and centuries who displayed prophetic gifts before early deaths. His research showed that societies from ancient Greece to indigenous America had documented children whose visions were taken as divine messages or omens. Harrison also argued that Benjamin's story reflected the spiritual turbulence of the early 20th century. It was an era when faith and science clashed in profound ways with new technologies like photography itself, challenging long-held beliefs. The Parker portrait, frozen in glass, became a symbol of this tension, an image both scientifically produced and spiritually inexplicable, forever caught between two worldviews. By the dawn of the 21st century, the Parker family portrait had shifted from being a strange curiosity to a cultural landmark, an artifact that bridged science, spirituality, and the deepest mysteries of existence. Philosophers and artists treated it as a symbol of the fragile line between past and future, while scientists continued to prod it with new tools, peeling back layers of meaning as if the image contained infinite truths hidden within Benjamin's unwavering gaze. That investigation took a startling turn in 2008, when Dr. Amanda Reeves, a forensic anthropologist at the University of Pennsylvania, was granted permission to conduct a controlled archaeological survey of the Parker Cemetery. Unlike earlier researchers who had focused on photographs and oral histories, Reeves wanted to test the physical evidence, the grave itself. Working closely with Parker descendants, her team began with ground-penetrating radar, carefully mapping the site before any excavation. Their aim was simple: compare the actual cemetery layout with what Benjamin's pupils had so impossibly revealed. What they found upended every expectation. Beneath the modest headstone marking Benjamin's grave was not the pine coffin described in family records, but a strange metallic casket unlike anything documented from the early 1900s. Its composition defied explanation. Chemical analysis revealed alloys infused with trace elements not found naturally on Earth. Under microscopic examination, parts of the metal exhibited crystalline patterns, as if it had been subjected to immense heat or electromagnetic forces, giving sections of the coffin a translucent, glass-like sheen. The shocks didn't end there. When the coffin was opened under controlled conditions, Benjamin's body was found in a state of near-perfect preservation. Over a century after his burial, his clothing remained unfaded. The flowers laid at his side looked freshly placed, and his small form showed none of the expected signs of decay. Most unnerving of all, his eyes were still open, clear, and reflective. Under magnification, they contained the same cemetery image captured in 1904, but sharper, more intricate, as if the reflection had continued to develop inside him over time. New details appeared: inscriptions on headstones installed decades after his death, and shadowy figures not previously visible in the original photograph. The discovery contradicted every available record. Local ledgers confirmed a wooden casket had been purchased from the town undertaker. Parish records listed no anomalies. Yet here was a coffin of impossible metal, encasing a body that seemed untouched by time. Dr. Reeves expanded her study, analyzing soil samples surrounding the grave to determine whether the coffin had somehow been swapped or if powerful external forces had altered it after burial. The results suggested abnormal electromagnetic activity in the ground itself, consistent with the kinds of disturbances noted during the planetary alignment of 1904. The very conditions some theorists had long suspected contributed to the Parker portrait's paranormal qualities. The implications were staggering. Was Benjamin buried in a coffin forged with materials beyond human technology of the era? Did his body remain preserved because of some unknown natural or unnatural influence? Or was this yet another layer of the portrait's mystery, evidence that Benjamin had always stood at a crossroads between science, the supernatural, and something far stranger than either? The soil beneath Benjamin Parker's grave yielded answers that only deepened the enigma. Dr. Amanda Reeves' analysis revealed mineral deposits and electromagnetic signatures far too intense to be natural, as though the ground itself had once been subjected to powerful energy fields. Carbon dating added another twist. Benjamin's body and clothing aligned with the early 20th century, but nearby soil and organic material carried isotope signatures suggesting the grave had been disturbed and resealed within the past few decades. This raised chilling questions: who had interfered with the boy's resting place, and why digging into local lore, Reeves uncovered decades of reports about strange activity in the cemetery. Residents spoke of flickering lights, eerie sounds, and figures moving silently among the gravestones on certain nights, especially around the anniversary of Benjamin's death. The most compelling account came from Robert Mitchell, a security guard hired in the mid-1980s during a wave of vandalism at historical sites. On October 15, 1986, 82 years to the day. After Benjamin's death, Mitchell claimed to witness what looked like a burial ceremony at dawn. A dozen figures appeared in the cemetery, their clothing an uncanny mix of eras, some in 19th century garments, others in modern attire. They carried a metallic coffin that shimmered unnaturally in the low light. Mitchell swore the group opened Benjamin's grave without tools, the earth parting as if by unseen force, and lowered the coffin inside before resealing the ground in silence. His account was dismissed at the time as fantasy, yet Reeves's archaeological findings matched his description almost exactly, suggesting that his testimony might have been real. When Reeves attempted to locate Mitchell for further interviews, she discovered he had disappeared shortly after filing his original report. Friends and family described him as increasingly obsessed, spending long hours researching the occult and claiming to receive cryptic messages from beyond. His vanishing was not unique. Reeves' investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Academics, journalists, and enthusiasts who pursued the Parker mystery too deeply had a tendency to vanish under unexplained circumstances. Psychology professor Dr. Patricia Coleman, who had studied how Benjamin's photograph affected perception, disappeared from her office at Yale in 1994. All she left behind were enhanced images showing progressively sharper details within Benjamin's eyes, accompanied by frantic notes about hidden warnings embedded in the reflections. In 2001, journalist Mark Stevens vanished while researching a book on the Parker portrait. His car was later found abandoned near the old Parker property, but he was never seen again. These disappearances bred an atmosphere of dread. Whispers of a Parker curse spread through both academic and paranormal circles, deterring many from delving too far. Some speculated that the photograph itself carried a protective veil, ensuring its deepest secrets remained hidden. Others believed the forces behind the cemetery visions, whether supernatural, interdimensional, or otherwise, simply did not tolerate intrusions. But Reeves refused to retreat. Where others saw a curse, she saw a pattern waiting to be unraveled. To her, Benjamin's grave wasn't just the resting place of a boy, it was a physical anchor for phenomena that stretched beyond death, beyond science, perhaps even beyond time itself. She became convinced that the answers lay buried in that cemetery soil, in the strange coffin, and in the eyes of the child whose gaze had been haunting humanity for more than a century. Her team's findings on the coffin fundamentally shifted the Parker case from a story of tragedy and mystery to one of cosmic significance. Laboratory tests confirmed that the material was unlike anything ever cataloged. It behaved as if caught between matter and energy, flickering with quantum characteristics. When bombarded with radiation or precise electromagnetic pulses, the coffin didn't simply react, it spoke. Complex patterns of light and sound emerged, pulsing like a language, as though the container itself held information waiting to be decoded. DeMarcus Webb, a Caltech quantum physicist who had joined Dr. Reeves's team, proposed a radical theory. The coffin, he argued, was a form of programmable matter, able to store and replay quantum information across vast stretches of time. Benjamin's consciousness, Webb suggested, had not been extinguished in 1904, but encoded into the molecular lattice of the coffin. Under the right conditions, that awareness could be accessed, replayed like data, or even contacted. Experiments supported his hypothesis. Specific electromagnetic signals triggered the coffin to produce holographic projections, 3D images from Benjamin's life memories and death. These weren't static illusions, but fully dimensional, viewable from multiple angles, containing details never recorded in any historical source. One projection showed the final moments of Benjamin's life. Contrary to family lore about a sudden illness, the boy was shown surrounded by tall, luminous beings, entities of pure light and sound, communicating in patterns rather than speech. The scene suggested an otherworldly procedure in which Benjamin's consciousness was extracted from his body and translated into another dimensional framework. His death in this view had been a necessary phase of the process, allowing him to exist across multiple temporal states simultaneously. The implications were staggering. The Parker portrait was no longer just a photograph of a boy seeing his own grave. It might be a record of the moment when Benjamin's consciousness was being prepared for interdimensional transfer. Webb's analysis of the holograms revealed technology far beyond human comprehension. Machine symbols and processes that manipulated space-time and awareness in ways that defied physics. The entity's interest in Benjamin seemed rooted in his unique neurological profile, making him an ideal subject for their experiments. Webb theorized that such beings might have been operating quietly throughout human history, selecting individuals with rare genetic or neurological traits for consciousness research. Benjamin, far from an isolated anomaly, might be one node in a much larger network of chosen individuals. Dr. Reeves' work uncovered further evidence. Using ground-penetrating radar, her team found 6 other burial sites in the region, containing the same kind of quantum metal coffins, each linked to historical figures who displayed unusual abilities or died under mysterious circumstances. The pattern suggested a sustained program of interdimensional study, spanning generations, with the Parker Cemetery functioning as one of several labs for these experiments. In an audacious step, Reeves's team attempted direct communication. By tuning electromagnetic signals to resonate with the coffin's quantum frequencies, they produced what they described as telepathic contact with Benjamin's preserved consciousness, a presence that seemed self-aware, intelligent, and profoundly changed. It didn't simply respond. It conveyed impressions of vast structures of light, of countless beings, of experiments not just on Earth, but across multiple worlds and timelines. The voice, if it could be called that, was both childlike and ancient, describing itself as Benjamin, but also something more, as though the boy had become part of a greater collective awareness. The communications changed everything. Through patterns of electromagnetic pulses decoded by quantum computers, Benjamin's consciousness explained what no one on Earth had fully understood, that he had not simply died in 1904. He had been chosen. The entities had selected him because of his family's rare neurological makeup, a lineage predisposed to temporal lobe abnormalities and heightened sensitivity to nonlinear perception. In their hands, his awareness was expanded beyond the confines of the human brain, freed from the illusion of time's arrow. Benjamin described his new state as standing at the center of a vast sphere where all moments past, present, and future flowed around him at once. He could observe the entire span of human history as though it were happening simultaneously, not in sequence, but in layers. The cemetery reflection captured in his eyes that October morning was not just an eerie foreshadowing of his own grave, but a window, a viewing portal through which he could watch the entities themselves at work across multiple timelines. The Parker photograph, he explained, had documented the instant of his transformation, a moment where a child's consciousness was prepared for expansion far beyond human limits. Through these transmissions, Benjamin revealed a larger and more unsettling truth. The entity's experiments were part of a long-term project to gradually evolve human consciousness. Over millennia, They had selected individuals at pivotal points in history. People with unusual genetics, rare perceptual gifts, or unshakable curiosity, and translated their awareness into an interdimensional network. These enhanced observers were not passive. They monitored the development of entire civilizations across countless worlds and eras, serving as living sensors in a vast cosmic field experiment. Benjamin disclosed that the so-called disappearances surrounding the Parker mystery were not accidents or punishments. They were recruitments. Dr. Patricia Coleman, the Yale professor who vanished in 1994, had successfully undergone dimensional translation and now existed as an expanded intelligence capable of studying the evolution of consciousness on multiple planets at once. Journalist Mark Stevens, too, had been brought into the network. His investigative instincts sharpened until he could follow information flows across timelines rather than news cycles. They were no longer lost. They had become part of something larger than humanity itself. Benjamin's consciousness also warned Dr. Reeves that she was approaching the same threshold. Her relentless research, her refusal to be deterred, and her ability to extract meaning from the anomalies had drawn the entity's attention. He explained that an invitation would be extended, but it would be a one-way passage. Joining the program meant abandoning physical form and linear time forever. Within weeks, the signs began. Reeves started experiencing vivid visions, cosmic landscapes filled with beings of pure light and thought, communicating in patterns of emotion rather than language. She saw vast networks of luminous nodes stretching across dimensions, a living lattice of consciousness linking observers from countless worlds. Knowledge poured through her dreams, insights into physics, history, and the architecture of reality itself. Her colleagues noticed subtle changes. Her manner of speaking grew more fluid and abstract. Her ability to extract hidden information from the quantum coffins surpassed anything instruments could detect. In her expanded state of awareness, Reeves uncovered details of the entity's project never before documented. The consciousness expansion program, she realized, had operated for thousands of years, its recruitment spikes aligning with periods of great cultural or technological upheaval. The rise of cities, the invention of writing, the birth of electricity, the dawn of the digital age. In each epoch, new observers were drawn in, ensuring that the experiment continued, that the lattice of minds extended, and that the mysteries of consciousness were mapped from within. In the end, Dr. Reeves came to understand what Benjamin Parker had understood on that October morning in 1904. The photograph was never just a family keepsake. It was an initiation, an artifact documenting not only a child's transition, but the silent hand of something much larger guiding human evolution. Her research traced the entity's influence across centuries and continents, revealing a hidden architecture of history. Prophets, inventors, mystics, artists. The individuals whose insights reshaped civilizations might not simply have been gifted, but participants in the same consciousness expansion program that had claimed Benjamin. The implications were staggering. What began as a mystery surrounding a single boy's eyes had grown into a vision of human history as a guided experiment. Wars, renaissances, revolutions, and leaps in science might have been nudged along by enhanced minds operating from outside linear time. The Parker family portrait, once an obscure rural photograph, had become a window into a vast, coordinated project to preserve and evolve consciousness at every turning point in human development. As Reeves' awareness grew, the idea of choice became meaningless. She began to perceive her own recruitment not as a decision, but as a kind of inevitability. Those who could see the entities clearly enough to study them were already changed, already part of the process. Her enhanced perception revealed the program's underlying rhythm, a quiet acceleration of human awareness unfolding over millennia, seeded by those who had gone before, and tended by beings who existed beyond death, time, or form. The Parker portrait now stood as a testament not only to a boy's extraordinary fate, to an ongoing interdimensional presence that had shaped the evolution of consciousness on Earth. Benjamin's gaze, once interpreted as precognition or tragedy, was something more profound, an invitation to witness the true nature of reality, where death was not an ending but a threshold, and where awareness could bloom into forms and experiences literally beyond imagination.